but they talk about weight management as a continuum with prevention of further weight gain at one end and weight loss maintenance at the other end. And everything in between is weight loss. Even though we might spend a lot of our time talking about weight loss within weight management, there's really three distinct phases. And for those of you who already are dietitians, you know that when you work with people, sometimes where you start is preventing further gain. And sometimes where you stop or end or take a hiatus or a break might be at maintaining the weight that you have already lost, right? How many people have heard about that yo-yo effect of you lose and you gain and you lose and you gain, and that doesn't have very positive effects on the body with any markers or anything else, also psychological effects too, and weight goes back and forth and back and forth. So weight loss maintenance is really a topic that we're going to hear a lot more about probably within this next decade, and we're hearing more about it now. Even when I was doing my, when you're doing your dissertation, you have to go way back to the first time research is ever put out about this topic, and I really can't find any older than like 1979 that specifically calls it weight loss maintenance. So it's really kind of a new topic that's only gaining steam right now. We're seeing the importance of maintaining any amount of weight loss, whether that's a 5 or 10% weight loss, whether that's 5 pounds, or whether that's a really significant amount of weight loss. So I like to think about it like a sandwich. One piece of bread is prevention of further weight gain. The bottom piece of bread would be weight loss maintenance, and everything in between can be the fillings of the sandwich. But if you don't have good anchors right there on the bread, right, your sandwich is just going to fall apart. So we have to think about it as a continuum, and that it's 3 stages. Now, one of the problems with studying weight loss maintenance is that there is no real definition. We can say it's maintaining any amount of weight loss for any amount of time, right? But we don't like doing that, right? As people in a science field, we want to say how much weight. Is it a percentage of your body weight? Is it a certain amount of pounds? For how long a period of time? So usually what we do is we resort to what the National Weight Control Registry does. The National Weight Control Registry, it's NWCR. Has anybody heard of it? A bunch of people have, but if you students haven't, it's a great thing to look at. It's a data bank really of 12,000 people who have elected to join on their own, and these people have lost 30 pounds or greater and maintained that weight loss for a year or longer. Okay, that's the criteria for getting in. And in my dissertation, I did what we call a qualitative dissertation, which means I was more interested in, I already had a lot of numbers from the registry, so I was interested in the stories that people told about their experience, more so than getting more numbers to add to this data bank. But I used this data bank, and I used its criteria at first, because this comes from somewhere, right? If people lose weight and maintain that weight loss for a year or longer, that's a meaningful amount of time, right? Oftentimes, people who enter the data bank in the National Weight Control Registry come from weight control programs, and anybody who's run a weight control program knows that they typically don't go on longer than a year. They're usually 6 weeks, 12 weeks, sometimes maybe even 3 months, but they're not long term. So I started looking into this data bank, and I started realizing that that there's a lot of missing pieces, of course, but it's a really good start. Then getting back to what is this definition of weight loss maintenance, what we see is over time, because this data bank produced so much research about their participants, that people started just using that 30 pounds or greater for greater than a year and attaching it to weight loss maintenance in other studies. That's not across the board. So at the end of the day, we don't really have a nailed down definition. It doesn't require one. It's not like something like obesity that's BMI based, that we all kind of can name a number and then name I guess for lack of a better word, put a label on it. But weight loss maintenance doesn't have that, because the field is very young. So this confounds the research significantly, because we are trying to always develop evidence backing, right? when we look at the research, if one study uses, you know, one definition and another study uses another definition, how do those line up? So then in thinking about my own research, I thought, you know, I know a lot of people personally, and I've met a lot of people through my work as a dietitian that have lost weight and have kept that off for a year, but then something else happens, right? A lot of times, and this is in the literature too, traumatic events of people's lives lead to a significant weight loss, and you can say that might be partially in or out of their control, but it might not be long term. And then when we look at data further out than a year, what we see is that the majority of people will regain that weight in that period of time, just right before the first year is over and then right after it's over too. So something's happening after that period of time. When we look at people 10 years out, of course we have a lot less people who have maintained that loss that they originally had. So I decided that I would look at women and that I would look at 3 years or greater to try to eliminate the effects of maybe something traumatic that has gone on in someone's life. In my study, I had a small sample because I did in-depth interviews of what these women's experience was. The average in my study was 7 years. They had maintained the weight loss for 7 years, and rather than 30 pounds, they had taken off 50 pounds. It also is important to know that all of the women in my study described their childhood or their youth as being overweight always. So they didn't become overweight, you know, in their young adult or older adult years. They always felt that they were overweight to begin with. Okay, so going on further, the next thing that I did is said, okay, what do we already know? Mostly from this data bank of 12,000 people. We know that a lot of the practices of losing weight are things that we have heard before, or that we hear in our classes, or that we hear people tell us, those of us who are in practice. In the data bank, there's 80% women, and that's why I chose to go with women just as a starting point. The average woman's age was 45 years old. Registry members lost an average of 66 pounds and maintained that weight loss for 5.5 years, but the range was between 30 and 300 pounds, believe it or not. So 30 and 300 pounds. So it was a really, really wide range. One of the really interesting things about this data bank is that when they survey people about how they lost weight, some people lost it really rapidly, and some people lost it slowly and sustainably. And what another interesting thing, and I'm kind of jumping around a little bit, the interesting thing is when people did gain their weight back, the patterns of weight gain were pretty similar for all people, whether they lost it slowly or not. So that's an interesting piece, and it was kind of surprising for me to learn that. 98%, this is no secret, but 98% of people said they modified their food intake in some ways, and the majority of them, over 90%, did some sort of physical activity and described doing more to maintain the weight loss that they have lost over time, and that's well supported in the literature too. 78% of these folks described themselves as breakfast eaters. They ate breakfast every day. 75% weighed themselves at least once a week. 62% said that they watched less than 10 hours a week of TV or direct screen time, not including screen time at their jobs. And let's see, we already talked about exercise. Okay. Other things in the literature: consistent dieting, decreased food variety. So one of the strategies that they took on in their diet is to just have a more limited variety of foods that they had. There was no consensus about how they did it. Initially, when the registry opened, which was like in the 80s, they described using more low-fat diets, and that was also the era of low-fat diets, right? But we know that right now, that's not the way that people are losing weight right now in general, but that kind of comes and goes. It depends, right, on the method that people use. So the methods that people employed to lose weight were very varied. I will say that. They were very, very varied. And let's see. And one of the other interesting things about the data bank was that everybody described frequent self-monitoring of some sort. So it could be daily weighing, it could be calorie counting, it could be just seeing how clothes fit, but some sort of checking in with themselves all the time in order to maintain the significant amount of weight that they lost. So the data bank, like I said, it's been in existence since about the early 90s, but it started collaborating in the 80s. And in 2010, it took until 2010, but this great article came out that said that, you know what, we think that the practices that are associated with maintaining a large weight loss might be different than the practices and strategies that people use to take off the weight in the first place. And that's sort of the aha moment for me that came in, because you know, when we survey people, we're limited, right? They give A, B, C, or D a question, you know, an answer to one of the questions that we ask. But we've really not done any qualitative research on any of these people, and really did in-depth interviews to ask them, well, tell me what a typical day is like for you, or what goes through your mind. How do you continue to do it? Is it hard or easy? Research seems to say all the time that it becomes easier over time, but there was no supporting evidence. Why does it become easy? Is it just lifestyle change that makes it easier? They never came out and said it. So I specifically set out to ask that question to people who have lost that amount of weight. Does this become easier over time? And I got some interesting results, which I'll get to in just a minute. Okay, so my research problem was this. Many individuals succeed at losing weight, but very few can keep those losses off long term. Another problem is that little is known about weight loss maintenance. That survey data hypothesizes things such as it becomes easier over time, but we really don't know what strategies people employ each and every day in order to do this. And my research questions were, how do women experience this weight loss and how do they describe it? What conditions or factors help or hinder them to continue to maintain this weight loss? And does it become easier over time? Okay, anybody need a break? Anybody have any questions? Yeah.
When you said exercise, did they say what types of exercise people were doing? Just walking or just like a mix?
Yeah, there are articles that talk about that. The majority of people did walking. But there is a mix of all different types of exercise that is, you know, by and large cardio activity, you know, but just general movement, you know. But there are a bunch. If you look on the National Weight Control Registry and you go onto research findings, there's about 25 articles, and about 5 of them are specifically about the types of exercise that you can see. Yeah. Okay. So when I started looking at this topic, I realized again that there's really nothing out there. So I needed to have something to go to help to drive the types of questions that I'd ask, because you know there's this skill there in interviewing somebody and taking your dietitian hat off, where you're always trying to give, you know, advice and information, and just listen and kind of probe for people to tell you their story and tell you what it's like. So in order to do this, I went into the social sciences a lot, into anthropology and sociology, and I looked at a lot of narratives of people who described their weight loss and their experience in being overweight. And it was very interesting to do that, because by and large what I read about a lot was a lot of talk about shame and stigma with obesity, and with just feeling defeated. I started to see the importance of social support in this process, and I was interested in that. And I also started to see what happens when your peer group also doesn't necessarily agree with what you're doing, or or like the fact perhaps that you're eliminating yourself from maybe certain types of events because of this desire to either lose weight or maintain a weight loss. So I looked into a lot of those sorts of things, and interestingly enough, it led me to a lot of Christian diet movements and different things like that, where I could read these narratives. I knew from that point on then that I was going to do these in-depth interviews. So anyway, I got a sample of 6 women together. I had 8, and then I was encouraged to stop at 6. So the interesting thing is, when with my criteria of 30 pounds or more for 3 years or greater, the minute that I decided that I would start putting the word out and seeing how I can get my sample, I got my sample in like less than 48 hours of 6 women. So there are a lot of people who have done this, but they don't necessarily walk into our offices as dietitians. You know, a lot of them do it alone. Of my 6, 1 had help from a dietitian. 1 was a long-term Weight Watchers attendee and attended in the United States and in Berlin. And everybody else sort of did it on their own. And so, for those of you who are RDs, don't you sometimes meet somebody who, you know, they have this great story to tell, they've done it all on their own, and you want to know what they've done? It was great meeting these women who have done it in just all kinds of different ways. And I interviewed them. On average, the interviews lasted from about 60 minutes to as much as 120 minutes, so they were long interviews. And oftentimes I did have to end them because people do like to talk about this topic. And that is definitely a finding that's probably not overly reported in my results, is that people like to talk about this and they want to talk to other people who have done it. But not a lot of people know other people who have done it, interestingly enough. And after transcribing my interviews and rewriting the stories that they told me and the results of my dissertation, which any of you are more than welcome to read. In fact, I'm going to pass it around, but just take a quick look through it. It's always, all of these are public, okay? If you did your PhD at IU, you just ask where to go to read anybody's information, and in a couple of months after they defend, you can do that. And so after doing that, what I wanted to see is what is in common with these 6 women. And I came up with 4 themes. And so my first theme I called I Am Hyper Aware. And the theme is really about the topics of control, balance, and rectification. And have any of you heard about dietary restraint and dietary disinhibition? They talk about that a lot in research articles. Just the dietary restraint is like thinking about, looking at your plate, looking at the proportions of your plate, reducing your portion size, saying I'm going to stick with this. That's what dietary restraint is. Dietary disinhibition is the loss of control over eating. So it's no wonder that all of the people in my sample and many of the people in the data bank report increased dietary restraint. So they feel more in control of their portion size, and decreased amount of disinhibition, just losing control. Also in this category, we have routines and regimens. A lot of the women talk about, this is my routine, this is what I do. When I break my routine, I'm not very comfortable, I don't really like it. And then reflexivity and problem solving. And because my dissertation was qualitative and I was more interested in what people say rather than, smashing some numbers and doing some more surveys, I thought I'd read to you some of the things that people say, okay? So I have too many and we don't have that much time, but I'll start with a couple and you just tell me whether or not I need to stop. Okay. As far as control goes, everybody has a pseudonym, so this is not their real name, but Ellen says, that doesn't mean that I don't struggle a lot, or that I sometimes don't overeat, or that I won't, really indulge and feel really badly, but I really generally have a good handle on it. Or to say that I won't sometimes feel like I'm losing control. I think it's about control for me. I'm a person who likes to be in control. So this is a control thing, and I won't say it's an issue, but it really is. So you can see there's a little bit of ambivalence about, okay, well, I have to be in control, but sometimes I feel like I'm losing control just a little bit, but then I can